A couple months ago, I made a video listing 5 background NPCs in Fallout 4 that I believe would make excellent companion characters if only Todd had given them their due. Naturally, these were just some of my personal picks, and was pretty psyched to see that many of you agreed with me, at least in regards to Dixie. But also, to absolutely nobody's surprise, the comments were jam-packed with other characters that I either hadn't considered or were cut because I was afraid if I did a top 7 list, those guys at Outside Xbox would bust through my walls like the Kool-Aid guy and kidnap my puppy. Anyway, there were several characters brought up in the comments over and over again that honestly, yeah, I agree, have great backstories and enough potential for character development that they would have also made excellent companion characters given just a few minor tweaks during the game's development. That's why I'm at it once again with 5 characters who should have been companions in Fallout 4, Part 2, Commenters Edition, Electric Boogaloo. If that sounds like fun to you, crack a top on your favorite flavor of Vim and check the batteries on your Geiger counter as Old Grade takes you right in with number 1. In my last video, I brought up Erickson as a great example of an NPC from the Far Harbor DLC who would have been a wonderful companion character to have. But including Erickson also brought up an interesting point from several folks in the comments that faction-specific companions would have been yet another way to deepen the exploration of each of the 3 factions found on the island. This inevitably led to Grand Zealot Richter getting like a bazillion upvotes, and, well, including Richter as a companion comes with a fair number of challenges. But first, let's tackle why he would make a great companion. He's the most heavily armored in the game and packs the most powerful companion default weapon in the game, assuming you're fighting humans, a radium rifle. Okay, those aren't the only reasons, but they're definitely a plus for someone who's supposed to be keeping the protagonist alive. Richter also has an interesting setup to his story. We don't know a great deal about him, but what we do know is that he used to be a soldier, specifically a lieutenant in the Enclave. When a mission went sideways, he and his team became trapped in a radioactive hellhole, and through several days of torturous rationing and constant radioactive exposure, his team died off one by one until only Richter was left. He was then rescued by the then Zealot Tectus, nursed to health by the Alchemist, and came to fully embrace the Children of Adam's beliefs. If it sounds like I just read the wiki article on him, well, that's because that's pretty much the only info we ever get about him. A quick and dirty personal history about his conversion, and really nothing else. But you know, that sort of makes sense. A lot of people, when they experience a radical conversion of faith, often look at their lives pre-faith as a separate life. They rarely discuss their pasts in new company out of either shame or just a genuine belief that what they do now is far more important than what came before. Granted, the Children of Adam are a very different religion from what's commonly practiced today, but it's still a common enough occurrence that in this context, his lack of history makes sense. It also gives us a ton of empty history to work with. We know he operated in the capital wasteland, but we don't know where he's from, where he was born, what his home was like, why he chose to become a soldier, or whether he was even given the option. As much as Arthur Maxon's Brotherhood has basically become a dirty imitation of the Enclave that they've fought for generations, we know a ton about their social structures, their beliefs, their motivations, and about many of the people that have shaped the Brotherhood of Steel into what it is today. But the Enclave gives you a lot less to work with. You have Frank Horrigan Smash. You have Bleep Bloop Baseball. Yeah, Southern Gentleman goes zap. That's pretty much it. Brian Richter could be the first true voice of the average everyday citizen of the Enclave, filtered through his current lens of religious fanatic, allowing us to dissect his biases and try to figure out what's the truth and what's simply a warped perception of the truth. It actually could have been really great. I honestly don't think that Richter needs a companion quest. There's enough busy work at the Nucleus that he can comment on and insert his commentary into that I think that's all that's really needed here. But this leads to the structural problems with implementing Richter as a follower. Richter is, in effect, the chief of security at the Nucleus and the head bodyguard of their leader, Confessor Tectus. All of the other zealots that patrol the base look to him for guidance and instruction, and while that certainly hasn't stopped some other important characters from turning wandering wastelander alongside the sole survivor, he is the only one who rests firmly at the top of their respective organizational trees instead of somewhere in the middle where their absence would be less noteworthy. Ignoring Hancock, he's kind of the mayor of a whole city, but moving on. Richter is also sort of the closest thing the Children of Adam have to a judge, basically intervening anytime there's an issue of loyalty or ideological compliance. It's unclear if there's a line of succession for him to fall back on were he to delegate that task. Confessor Tectus used to be the Grand Zealot prior to the disappearance of Confessor Martin, so he would know how to do the job, but I don't know. Try asking the guy at the top to start doing the jobs of his underlings because they want to go shoot crawdads down at the creek and see how they react, I guess. There's also just the issue that despite once having been a soldier and field operative, that was in a former life, before his religious awakening born of a near-death experience. Richter is a zealot through and through, and it would take some pretty significant mental gymnastics to get him to ignore his absolute devotion to the COA and Tectus in particular. Also, he can go shoot up a pop factory. Even then, however, I don't see these challenges as being insurmountable. Perhaps Richter could appoint Zealot Thiel to assume his duties in his absence, and naturally you could just pass a few speech checks convincing him that traveling with you is somehow helping the Children of Adam's cause on the island. In any case, Richter being a companion loyal to the COA would serve as a nice foil to Old Longfellow, who represents the people of Far Harbor as a whole, but that only gives us 2 out of 3 factions, so let's talk about who Acadia could add to this conversation. High atop the tallest peak on the eastern seaboard, Acadia stands as a glowing utopia for escaped synths who don't wish to go through the extreme actions that the railroad takes to keep synths safe from the Institute. But it was not always so. When the prototype 2nd-gen synth, Dima, decided to set up shop at Acadia, he was pretty much just looking for a home away from the nucleus due to some personal problems developing between him and Confessor Martin. Shameless plug time, check out my History of Dima video if you're interested in that story. Anyway, this period of quiet reclusiveness ended when a courser arrived while hunting a runaway Gen 3 synth on the island. Intrigued by a Gen 2 like Dima with all the capabilities of a Gen 3, something caused her to hear Dima out, and he slowly convinced her of the error of her ways. That courser, who chose to desert the Institute herself, took the name Chase. Chase now works tirelessly to do the opposite of what pretty much all coursers do to help escaped synths stay escaped. Naturally, as a courser, she is a highly skilled infiltrator and combat operative who uses her own network of informants to perform counterintelligence operations against the Institute and help funnel escapees to Acadia. Interestingly, she seems to favor a heavy-handed approach to combat compared to most coursers, hurling grenades and packing an assault rifle, so an interesting subversion of expectations, but could also make sense. If you're trying not to draw much attention on an island swarming with 2-ton mantis shrimp and 3-ton hermit crabs, some sort of hard-hitting weapon is definitely required, but a futuristic laser pistol that fires blue lasers sort of stands out when all the pre-war stuff fires red. Naturally, there's all the usual courser backstory that makes her so compelling as a follower, as long as she wouldn't, be squandered like X688. It seems like lately I've been bashing X6 more than freaking Todd. Anyway, unlike X6, Chase chose to leave the Institute, so there were obviously some sort of cognitive dissonances that caused her to abandon her home, her profession, and effectively her entire past life in the name of helping her fellow synths escape. The exact opposite thing that she was literally born to do. A companion storyline would be an excellent opportunity to explore those dissonances, contrasting the complicated emotions she was feeling with the relatively straightforward missions that she had been entrusted to. What it was like confronting those emotions, critically analyzing her actions and their consequences, rectifying the fact that she was bred for a specific purpose, born into slavery, and her entire mission in life was to hunt down escaped slaves and return them for what effectively amounts to summary execution in a horrifyingly painful and inhumane manner. You can't tell me that her companion story isn't packed with literary gold. As far as companion questlines go, I think she could do with one. A simple one, nothing huge or convoluted. Say for instance you need to track down a synth who's late to arrive at Acadia. I know there's already a quest like that, but hear me out. Along the way you discover from one of her contacts that a courser is on the synth's tail, so now you have to hurry to track down the courser before they can catch up to the synth. Along the way she can display her tracking techniques in action, covering her tracks as she goes, working double duty, trying to catch an adversary of equal skill while doing her best to prevent the same. Maybe you can track them down to some sort of dungeon run, like the spa that doesn't really have anything going on. But once you're there, you discover the courser has led you into a trap, forcing Chase to acknowledge that coursers are becoming more advanced, more intelligent, more highly trained, and are even learning to counter escaped coursers. Obviously, it would be too easy if you could just talk your way out of the situation, so courser equals boss fight. Afterward, Chase has a heart-to-heart where she's forced to wonder if what she's doing is really a long-term solution or whether her and Acadia are just prolonging prolonging the inevitable. Eventually, the Institute will win. But the sole survivor can either give them the pull yourself up speech or reassure her that this was a learning experience and that this courser had taught her new tricks, tips, and lessons, and all she needs to do is analyze the situation and do her best to determine suitable alternatives. The quest can finish by tracking the escaped synth, and Chase separates from the sole survivor to take the synth to Acadia via a secret route that she knows. The quest ends with max affinity. Her perk would be something that suitably improves your tracking capabilities, improved perception while crouched and standing still, maybe using the aim button while your weapon is holstered highlights nearby enemies, sort of like Booth's companion perk from Fallout New Vegas, giving players an alternative to VATS spamming. In any event, the quest itself serves as the training to earn this new skill, so it's not just, yep, you ticked all the boxes, so here's a permanent perk. It would actually feel earned and directly related to the quest you just undertook. Is it a basic, simple quest? You betcha. But all in all, I think Chase's characterization and backstory mostly speak for themselves, and a quest would just be that little bit of icing on top. Now, Chase is an Institute-trained tracker, so she can spot things that the rest of us might miss, but one thing that's pretty easy to spot is the like button. I'd appreciate it if you'd give it a tap if you're enjoying the video so far. Viewer engagement is the primary metric I use to determine the sort of content that provides the most value to you, a random person on the internet who has the power to choose if I can afford the upkeep on my Mr. Handy, or if I have to tell Sloppingham he's got to deal with a few missing appendages for a while. Please, thank you, and now on with our list. Continuing right along on our train of faction-specific followers is Glory. Glory is a exceedingly underutilized character in Fallout 4. When we first discover the Railroad, she is the only heavy agent that we can encounter, and she sort of stays that way for the majority of the Railroad questline, up to the moment where dozens of them pop up out of nowhere to defend Bunker Hill from the Institute and Brotherhood of Steel. But that's an issue for a 5 Easy Fixes video. Like this one. Hint, hint, wink, wink. Okay, fine, I'll stay on topic. Anyway, Glory is interesting because she holds some of the most extreme beliefs in the Railroad. While basically everyone in the Railroad believes that the Gen 3 synths are sentient conscious beings with free will and that they need to be rescued from the Institute as their use of Gen 3 synths constitutes slavery, Glory's belief in this concept extends all the way to Gen 1 and 2 synths as well, which while exhibiting some mannerisms and behaviors shared with humans in Gen 3s, are a much harder sell to convince pretty much anyone that they're anything more than a next-gen Protectron brain in a next-gen Assaultron package. Glory is also critical of the Railroad's use of mind wipes to protect synths, which, you know, is completely valid for anyone who believes these are sovereign intelligent beings. You're essentially killing the person to save the being. Her belief that Gen 1 and 2 synths also deserve respect and protection does mean that she's a potential liability on missions, and as such, the various cells that make up the Railroad can be pretty reluctant to call her in. But once she's on the field, she goes hard, packing a minigun of all things and shredding her way through any threat to the Railroad and the synths they protect. But then she just sort of, dies when the Brotherhood of Steel attacked the Railroad HQ, and that's the end of her story. We never really get to learn about how she escaped the Institute, what it's like being a synth that rejected the mind wipe but still has to stand by and watch as what are effectively her brothers and sisters get strapped to a chair and have everything that made them ripped from their head and have replacement memories inserted in their place. And that's even assuming that the new memories take and that they don't just become a vegetable, a tragic consequence that she's also witnessed. As a faction-specific companion, she would serve as a fun contrast to Deacon, who is intriguing just because we don't know anything about his past, and what we do know, we have to at least question whether he's actually told us the truth or is just feeding us more of his particular brand of Brahmin ploppies. Glory, on the other hand, puts everything out in the open, and we really just didn't get to know that much about her, and it would have gone a long way toward adding depth to a faction that is otherwise just an endless string of Radiant quests for a bunch of paranoid abolitionists. You guys are trying to get me demonetized, aren't you? Fine, I'll do it for you. Nestled away in a dark alley somewhere in Boston's North End is a pre-war home that now plays host to an art gallery, but the art style is what one might call excessively niche. The artist is named Pickman, and Pickman likes to use found art, and by found, I mean he uses human body parts and blood in all of his works. The main reason why most people tend not to worry about the Pickman popping into their shack and snatching them up in their sleep is that Pickman is a serial killer psycho with a code. He only kills raiders. Now, we don't really know why he only kills raiders, only that he refers to it as his hobby, and that there are some random encounters where dead raiders can be found in his unique calling card placed on their bodies, as well as his gallery stuffed to the rafters with dead raiders in various states of dismemberment that show he really really likes his hobby. When we arrive at Pickman's gallery, we can see that he's currently being hunted by a large gang that don't appreciate being used as Pickman's personal Hobby Lobby haul. Fighting our way through the grisly gory gallery of ghoulishly gonzied goons brings us to Pickman currently facing down Slab, the gang's leader. We can either help Pickman or kill them both, a rare exercise in moral relativism from good old Emil. Do you leave an unapologetically evil person alive knowing that he specifically only murders other unapologetically evil people, or do you eliminate evil wherever you find it? Holy heck, this is actually a perfect analogy for the morality of Maxon's Brotherhood of Steel. I'll have to come back to that topic at some point. In any event, we have the option to leave Pickman alive, in which case he can very politely thank us for our help and send us off to fetch our Seriously, you're going to reward us with a frickin' fetch quest? Ugh. Anyway, that's pretty much the end of the story there. Naturally, I don't have to mention that having a serial killer as a companion would be invaluable for someone doing an evil playthrough. Pickman in his finely tattered suit, politely interjecting with heartless and violently inflammatory dialogue to add to the occasional cathartic badass intimidation factor to our convos, it's got potential. With all that said though, I personally feel like we're just ending up with a male version of Dixie from my last Companions video. Pickman naturally would attack with a combat knife by default. You get the disarming voice of a horrifying monster, and just like with Dixie, I feel like any companion questline or revelations about his past would detract from his character as we discover him. Cold-blooded, emotionless killers don't really need a reason for us to sympathize with them. We don't really need to feel sorry for them because they're basically evil incarnate. Any revelation that Pickman started down this road because raiders killed his family or wronged him in some deep personal way sort of requires that he have the emotional depth that people feel the need to redeem him, and I just don't think a simple video game companion character like this should really require a full-time psychiatrist on staff to write a believable backstory just for a few extra minutes of gameplay. Just give us a psycho to run with for a while, and just make sure that when you're done with him to send him to Sanctuary with nobody else around but Marcy Long, and hope for the best. Imagine that you're a little boy growing up in the post-apocalypse and that your parents have been killed. Suddenly, you're all alone in a massive theme park populated with scary monsters, bad people, and are tired, hungry, and afraid. Now imagine a bunch of semi-undead gorillas find you and adopt you and keep you safe and end up teaching you everything a gorilla needs to survive in the 200-year-old remains of the zoo that used to house them. If you actually followed that little mental exercise, congratulations, you just imagined our friend Cito's story. When we find him, Cito's a fairly youthful, jacked-as-hell dude barely capable of speaking halted English but fluent in gorilla grunting. In typical ape fashion, he's pretty adept at basic tools, and by basic tools I mean whacking threats with a board until it stops being a threat. Sadly, there are limits to such a tool when faced with the freakish result of alligator DNA combined with good old-fashioned FEV, known in the Nuka World region as gator claws. Seriously, couldn't you have tried just like a smidge harder on the name there, Todd? Anyway, Cito is an interesting character because there's not a whole lot of his background to explore. You might get a couple minutes of dialogue discussing how hard it was to adapt to life among gorillas, learning to speak gruntese, stuff like that, but otherwise he just doesn't have much of a history at all. He was extremely young when his parents died, so he doesn't have many memories from that past life. But the key reason I think so many people wish he was a companion, other than the dude's basically Jason Momoa pre whatever the hell he's doing these days. Well, Cito is basically a blank slate with unlimited potential character growth. Given adequate time running with the sole survivor, Cito could start developing a more robust vocabulary, basic, and I mean basic, understanding of sciences, of the world as it exists, as it once was, of what it could be. The sole survivor could mold him into any shape that they want. Freedom fighter, liberator, protector, raider, slaver, murderer. Cito has no other role model for what it means to be human. He just knows that he's different from his family at the primate house. Cito's evolution could be visible in the types of weapons that he wields, starting with the board that we find him with, upgrading to a sledgehammer, which he will do at higher levels, then maybe transitioning to a sword if he's present when the sole survivor deals with Oswald. Maybe there's a quest to help him develop some of the basic skills you would normally teach your kids, tying shoes, buttoning shirts, zipping pants, shooting and maintaining firearms, cooking, the birds and the bees, how to turn Brahmin crap into a narcotic, proper hygiene, you know, the basics. Things Cito's parents would have taught him if they hadn't been super mutated to death while he was young. It gives so much to Cito's character as a whole and would have added a bit of much needed heart to the Nuka World DLC. And before you start saying that Nuka World's not supposed to have any heart, it's about being a bastard for bastard's sake, the inclusion of Evan basically nullifies your entire argument. Go sit still and drink your juice box, sweetie. Let the grown-ups talk. As much as I'd like to say that these were the only 5 characters that came up in the comments and that together you and I have listed the only characters that had the potential to be great companion characters, that would be a lie. And I'm no liar, unless it suits me, then I lie, but in this case I'm not. So suffice it to say, there were a lot of recommendations on my first video, and these 5 were just some of the ones that came up repeatedly that I saw a lot of potential in. But these 5 hardly constitute a universal list, so if your favorite what if companion hasn't been mentioned yet, I'd love to see your votes and rationale in the comments. Maybe I'll be able to pull an episode 3 out of this series. But while you're mulling that over in the old noggin, I wanted to take a moment to salute my patrons over at Patreon whose steadfast support continues to help Grey Gaming develop and improve. Today I'd like to welcome 2 new non-commissioned officers to the ranks, Saint of Fire and Cheese Curd Actual. Special salute to my officer tier patrons Josh B and Carver050, as well as to the other non-coms who keep the grunts on point. Until my next salute, stand at ease. Thank you so much for sticking around till the end of the video, stay safe, and I hope to see you here next time on Grey Gaming.